Welcome back into the Friday Night 360 AZ preview show. Haley Stasiak and Jordan Ham. We're going to do something a little different for this segment. We're going to take a look at some playoff stuff as a whole. Let's start out, Jordan, with some of these rematches that we're seeing here in the quarterfinals. We've got quite a few of them, a lot of them on the west side of town. Start out here with Higley-Castile, which is one of the ones that I'm going to be out at. Castile won this one 56-24 in the regular season. Saw Higley second to last week of the regular season against Gilbert. They looked pretty good. A little bit of a slow start at the first quarter, but once they got that rolling, Spencer Brash and that offense was really going. Yeah,
and on the other side, you have Castile. I was at their game last week. Boy, do they look good. They pretty much
had a slow start to the season.
Yeah, but 4 minutes into the game, they were up 21-0. Gunnar Cruz was kind of doing whatever he wanted. I didn't have many incompletes in that game. It was a very complete game by the Colts against a tough Horizon team that's, I think, better than most 13 seeds. But it seemed like they were just really imposing their will on this game. And I think we're going to touch base on this one a little bit later, so I'm not going to get too much into it. But we saw Higley last year, and I mentioned this last week. Higley got pushed around in the regular season last season, a little bit by Saguaro. They came back, made it a multiple overtime thriller. So I think getting a second crack at the same team that beat them up a little bit early in the year, that could be a very different game this week.
Centennial and Cienega. Centennial won that one 35-0 in the regular season. I was out at that first round game with Centennial in Sunny Slope, and the first play of the game, they had a pick six. So that Centennial defense is absolutely unbelievable. They know how to get the ball across the end zone. This one, I mean, we had Cienega kind of in the conversation last week about would Marana be a team to kind of upset them? I mean, that was a 8-9 seed game, so it was kind of like Cienega's the favorite there, but there could be some stuff with that Marana team that we thought maybe could overtake Cienega, but they're here in the quarterfinals now.
Yeah, and they continue. Let's see. Centennial beat Cienega 35-0 earlier in the season. They have given up 16 points in the last 6 weeks.
Yep.
So really tough to win a game when you can't score. And we're going to go more in depth on this one with Justin Spears on what Cienega can do to probably play the ultimate spoiler if they're able to pull off an upset. I know that he's going to have some interesting thoughts on this one.
Williamsfield Sunrise Mountain. This is another one that I'm going to be out at this week, checking out Williamsfield and Sunrise Mountain for the first time. I met Keegan Freed a couple weeks ago, and I just have to say, on and off the field, from what I've heard, from what I've seen off the field, and from what I've heard on the field, just an all-around complete kid.
Yeah.
And he is the X factor, I think, in this game.
I think he's going to have to be. We've talked about Williamsfield being so dominant as of late. Sunrise Mountain only lost by 5 to them early in the season.
23-18 in week 1.
Yeah, so it's interesting. All 3 of these are 5A games.
We talked about this 5A. I mean, we talked about the Santan region a lot, but we've talked about this 5A division so much this season just because of all of the talent here. Yeah,
totally. And it's going to be another one where I think Sunrise Mountain, Williamsfield's really hitting their stride. We saw Sunrise Mountain struggle against Centennial a couple weeks ago. They're going to have to play a very complete game, and Keegan Freed, I think, is really going to have to go off. But also that defense and facing a very physical front line on the Williamsfield offense, but a very physical front 7 and a really good secondary for Williamsfield defensively.
Northwest Christian, Ben Franklin. In week 2, Northwest Christian took this one 21-13. Northwest Christian is a team here that, I mean, they dominate this 3A division. And I know we're going to talk here in a second about another matchup with what they call the East Side Northwest Christian with Valley Christian. We've talked about them a little bit last week too. I know Jordan's like,
I was like, I don't know what this is.
But Northwest Christian, Coach Innes's son, Dustin, is unreal. He can play both sides of the ball. And they have a lot of playmakers on that side.
Northwest Christian consistently a top 4 seed in 3A. I feel like 3A is really wide open this year, though. I think that this really, the second round on, it's going to be really tough to call some of these games. Ben Franklin lost to them 21-13 in week 2. We talked last week and state your case about Ben Franklin, how they're finally getting healthy.
Right.
They have some key members, especially on that offense. They can get that run game really going. This is a very different Ben Franklin team, and I have a feeling that this is going to be a very close game yet again.
This is one that our Kennedy Wilkerson will be out at this week, so be sure to follow her on Twitter for
Intern
updates
to the
today.
stars.
She's awesome. So let's look at this Valley Christian page. Page 1 in the regular season, 22-15. I think Valley Christian did kind of face some adjustment stuff in the beginning of the season, but we talked last week about this team and just the unique thing they do with their 2 quarterbacks and how that worked for them. And they kind of have a little bit of that element of surprise, because while these teams may be able to game plan by watching the film, when you get into that game action, David Ennis told me they weren't ready for it. They saw it on film and they tried to figure it out, but once it was happening real time, they weren't ready.
Yeah, and this game was kind of the start of Valley Christian's slide. In the middle of the season, they dropped 3 straight games, but then came back really strong. And now, like you said, I feel like they're really starting to hit their stride. And I think this is a very dangerous 5 seed in 3A. I would not be surprised to see this team in the state championship game as a 5 seed. And like I said, they seem like they have the hot hand right now. So I think again, just a 7-point loss. A lot of these matchups, the last 3 that we've talked about, have been within 1 score. I think it's a coin flip.
Let's go ahead and get into our toughest game to call this week. Before we're going to get into our number 1 seeds, take a look at that stuff. Going to talk about some players that we think are going to make impacts and be the changing factor, that X factor in these games. Then we have a couple upset watches to look at. But let's go ahead and check out our toughest game to call this week. What's yours?
Well, and we're going to be bringing in Devin Henry from here on out, MVP of the Friday Night 360 AZ preview show.
True.
So he's going to be given his predictions. He knows the West Side very well. I don't know if it'll be West Side specific, but he's jumping in. The voice of Devin Henry will be jumping in with us. Toughest game to call for me, Higley Castile. I said that Higley, in my bold prediction, that Higley would be making a run. This isn't a comment upon Higley. It's more of a comment upon Castile, because what I said earlier, they looked so good. So it's going to be tough to beat a really hot Castile team. And talking to Zach Nelson after the game, he's like, look, we played in the Santan region. We feel like we've already played 6 playoff games going into this postseason. And what they were able to do and just really dominate, again, a really good Horizon team, that makes me very conflicted with my early prediction about Higley. But Higley has the experience at quarterback. They have the experience along the defensive line. I think on paper they have the best defensive line in the state. They have a really good members of the secondary, but what Castile was able to do last time they played, they rushed for 7 touchdowns. Gunnar Cruz didn't need to take shots downfield. He just kind of had to pepper Zach Nelson. Zach Nelson had 130 yards, and they were able to kind of control it. So that's why it's going to be so tough for me to make a decision on this game, because it's just so much D1 talent on one field at one time.
Devin, let's go ahead and get your opinion on what you've got for your closest game here.
Yeah, outside the comfort zone. We're going to move over in the 6A conference. I talked to you guys about it before the show. Mountain Point Chandler. We've talked about on AZ Audibles on Brad's Sesmat Football AZ. It's been a roller coaster of a year. We know Chandler is incredible and all that, but I'm really curious to see exactly if Mountain Point can put a chip in the armor of Chandler, because, you know, Cienega, against Centennial. I don't know, Centennial's just destroyed everyone. Saguaro plays Cactus. I think that besides Northwest Christian, the 3A, the only number 1 seed that I can see really getting a chip in their armor this week is going to be Chandler, just because of Mountain Point. That's a tough 8 seed right there.
It is, and a lot of credit goes to the defense. The thing about Chandler, though, I feel like they would be able to maybe not completely contain, but limit the run game of Mountain Point. And we know Nick Wallerstadt, when he's at his best, he can run around a little bit. They have a couple of running backs that can really get going. They even have wide receivers that they'll use, jet sweeps on. I feel like Chandler's built well to contain that. Yep. But certainly a game to watch.
Definitely. For me, I'm going to take the West Side here for Devin. I'm going with Highland and Liberty. Now, this is a number 5 seed Highland against a number 4 seed Liberty, and both of these teams absolutely dominated in the first round. It was Highland 45 against number 12 Cesar Chavez. They only scored 7. And then Liberty against Westview. Westview is the number 13 seed. 56-21 was the final score there. So these teams are just putting up points like no other. They've got that. Both teams seem to have a run game.
Yep.
Both teams seem to have quarterbacks that can find a plethora of receivers, and these defenses are intense. So it'll be interesting to see if this is a close scoring game because of the talent on both of these defenses, or if this is a high scoring game because both these offenses can get it going.
I walked away. This is going to be the first time I'm seeing Highland. I'm going to be at this game. Really looking forward to seeing them. They've been on my list all year. I just haven't quite been able to
Well, I've talked about
get
them so much. It's been no wonder.
Right, yeah. She's been the spokesperson for the Hawks. But Liberty, I watched them play Pinnacle, and I came away really impressed. They are, aside from a Pinnacle comeback, they could be the 2 seed in this region. They're super experienced on the defensive side. They have some really good running backs, and it's just a typical Liberty team that's super physical and can really just, kind of pound the ball. But from what I've seen from Highland, that seems like similar.
It's
kind of
very
that
similar.
Spider-Man meme we've used before, where it's just the 2 Spider-Mans pointing at each other. Very similar teams.
No, and I think after last season, with what we saw Liberty be able to do, they've got that going for them. But at the same time, Highland was able to make a mark last season too under Brock Farrell, his first year. We heard from him earlier in the show. So looking at this one more in depth is, I don't know, I like this game.
Yeah.
Next up, let's go ahead and take a look at these number 1 seeds.
Okay.
Talked a little bit about Chandler here in the quarterfinals taking on Mountain Point. Devin believes that Mountain Point may be the team to take a chip off of Chandler. Let's go ahead and look at 5A then. Centennial, obviously just dominant with this. What are you seeing with what's really been clicking for Centennial?
I think it's just the defense, and Centennial is, what we are, try and stop us, and you're probably not going to stop us. There's no secrets about what Centennial has done over the past however many years under
Right.
Rich Taylor. Even in the offseason, a couple off seasons ago, Eric and I were over there, and they talked about the percentages from year to year of how much they run the ball versus how much they pass the ball, and it's like within a percentage point of what they do, and they just have this culture. They know it. They know what fits it, and they just are really able to just groom these players over 3 years to have young contributors step in, and then by the time they're seniors, they're Avengers.
Avengers. Jordan loves his Avengers comparisons.
I do.
In 4A, South Point Catholic, and I want to take a look at South Point Catholic and Saguaro here because I feel as though this 1 and 2 seed is a 1 and 1 seed a little bit.
1A, 1B.
Yeah. So South Point Catholic, obviously that run game. We talk about Centennial's run game and their go-tos. South Point's obviously got Bijan Robinson, who is he even human? There's no way to stop Bijan Robinson. There really isn't. I think I've said that before. But they've got a couple other playmakers, and Lathan Ransom as well. So what are you seeing with South Point?
Again, the brand of what they're going to do and try and stop them. Jonah Miller stepped in really nicely for Mateo Mele, their offensive tackle who moved on to Washington, was a very good recruit and was kind of the anchor of that offensive line that made it to the state game last year. Jonah Miller, as a sophomore, just picked up an ASU offer. He's the guy along that offensive line right now. And it's just one of those, what we're going to do, try and stop us. Probably not going to stop us, and just a really good mind at head coach with Dennis Benet as well.
Looking at number 2 Saguaro now, taking on number 7 Cactus. We'll go ahead and bring Devin back in here for this one because he's our expert on this Cactus team. Done a lot of stuff around them, done some play-by-play for them as well. Devin, you've got obviously this excellent Saguaro team. What are you seeing as they match up with Cactus in the quarters?
Well, it's actually kind of funny that of course, we all know the Cactus-Peoria rivalry. The last 2 years, Saguaro has taken out Peoria in the second round. So I don't know if that's a good omen or a bad omen for Cactus. But, Saguaro is obviously the class of the 4A conference, 5-time defending state champions. They beat Cactus in 2011 for the state tournament championship. And talking to Joe Ortiz before the Cactus-Peoria game, it's funny when you talk to a coach in week 10 and they say, this is the healthiest our team has ever been this year. And then, of course, you lose your starting quarterback in that game.
That lasted long.
Yeah, they didn't last very long. But it's so funny. I said in the Cactus Peoria game, Zach Kolb coming in the Wildcat, and then I went, well, he's also had like a 78-yard touchdown pass this year, so I don't know if you can call that I don't think you can call that a Wildcat, but, they're more than potent to put in a few different players in the quarterback slot, but Saguaro is just too good all around. It doesn't matter where you look on that team. But I want to look even at next round. They're either going to take on a Greenway or Desert Edge. If South Point Catholic and Saguaro is 1A, 1B, Desert Edge is the obvious 2 right behind them. So I think Saguaro's
very good team.
Agreed with that.
Saguaro's path to the state championship is so much harder than South Point's because they have to take on Desert Edge.
I totally agree with you there, and I think just the difference in this game, Saguaro's depth. We see, and that's kind of the difference between the Chandlers, the Centennials, the Saguaros, is they go honestly 3 or 4 deep at each position, where when you have an injury, you're able to just fill in with another stud. So I think that's why everyone's kind of looking at this Saguaro, Desert Edge, Sal Point kind of group kind of being the cream of the crop here in 4A.
In 3A, Northwest Christian is the #1 seed, and we've already talked about them a little bit. I think we kind of overlook this 3A division a little bit and the talent that's there. I mean, we've talked about some of these teams quite a bit, but I think that this one with Northwest Christian as the 1 seed, Yuma Catholic, who's that sneaky good
fun
team. Last year we talked about them and how fun they were to watch last year too. So looking at that #2 seed there with Yuma Catholic as well, what are you kind of seeing with that?
Well, if the game's gonna be a shootout, I would take Yuma Catholic in pretty much any of these games because Gage Reese is so good at the quarterback position. They're kind of the team that I look at that's remaining of these 8 teams left in 3A, that it's like potent air attack, let's go get it. The other kind of 7 seem to be let's ground and pound, run it, a lot of depth, maybe the triple option thrown in there, but they seem to be kind of the different style. And again, I think that I would not be surprised if Yuma Catholic is hoisting the trophy at the end.
Hoisting the trophy.
Hoisting.
Let's go ahead. Let's skip to our upset watch here real quick.
Okay.
What do you have with the upset watch?
Upset watch. I alluded to it a little bit before. I'm sticking with my guy, Andy Luberta. I think that the upset to watch is Ben Franklin over Northwest Christian.
Okay.
This is not your typical mid-tier seed for Ben Franklin. I think they're closer to a 3 or a 4 seed, but now that they're fully healthy, I think that they can, maybe shock the world here and beat a still very good Northwest Christian team. But I don't think the seed, I don't think the record shows the talent that Ben Franklin has.
For me, I'm going with Seton Catholic and Saguaro.
Okay.
And the reason I'm going with this is because Seton Catholic is the highest seed to make it to the quarterfinals. You have a couple 10 seeds, I believe, in 5A and 3A that made it. But Seton Catholic is a #13, and they upset that Peoria team in a really good game last Friday in the first round. And then the Saguaro team was one of the ones that I kind of said could be the one to make a push. But at the same time, I was wrestling between Saguaro and Seton last week when we were getting ready for that part of the show. So I think that I'm not sure necessarily that I would call this an upset just because of where these teams are seated, but I mean, Seton pulled out the upset last week for sure.
Right.
So Saguaro's the #5 seed.
They have a lot of experience
They do.
at some really key positions as well.
Vincent Wallace at quarterback there, yeah. So that's going to be my kind of upset. Devin, what is your upset watch?
I'm going to look over at the Sunrise-Williamsfield game. And, Jordan, you've already talked about, the biggest thing to overcome for Sunrise is going to be that Williamsfield defense. And we talked about how this is a rematch. Well, back in that game, Keegan Freed still had over 350 total yards. He's a monster. I even talked to head coach Steve Decker in my Best in the West podcast that came out this morning, and I asked him, so what have you guys learned 11 weeks later to take down, the 2016 state champions? And he said, I don't know. I think that, first of all, they didn't necessarily worry about it that much because it was week 1.
Right.
And then you go through the whole season, and your only other loss is to Centennial, believe it or not. And then I think that he knows. He knows what it is, and part of it is the defense that held running back Drake Flores and the wide receiver Jay Anderson to almost nothing last time around. If the offense can include those two, I think that those 5 points are really easily made up. But Zach Shepard is such a good quarterback when it comes to being out in the helm of that Williamsfield offense. But I really think that if you can include Drake Flores and Jay Anderson in the offense this time around and the defense can't hold them, that's a 7/2 seed I'll take any day of the week.
Real quick here, good stuff from Devin as always. Real quick here, let's go ahead and mention the players that were kind of watching here that could be our X factors or our great equalizers, as you phrased it earlier. For me, it's Zach Nelson at Castile. I haven't gotten to see Zach in person yet play. I've heard a lot of great things about the way he can just maneuver around the field, so I'm looking forward to seeing him.
Yeah, and the great thing about him for this Castile offense, he's a deep threat, but he doesn't have to be a deep threat.
Kind of a quiet, it seems.
Yeah, well, and it can be a 5-yard in, gunner hits him, and then he just works with the space he has, and it's a 40-yard pickup. So that's where he's so dangerous. My guy, Jake Smith, the great equalizer. I watched him against Horizon be kind of silenced in the first half. They were pretty much triple teaming him the entire time. Coach Prelock put him in the Wildcat, and when it was all said and done, he had 5 touchdowns. Wow. So just the ability to score at will in so many different ways. And Jake Farrell does a great job getting him the football and taking care of the football, that I think if you need a great performance to really get a team back into the game, it's Jake Smith.
And on AZ Audibles this week, Eric and I were out at Notre Dame Prep catching up with head coach George Prelock. We talked about Jake Smith a little bit, a couple of other of their threats, and Jake Farrell as well. So be sure to check that out on sports360az.com. Devin, do you have a player to watch that's going to be your great equalizer before we head it out?
Mark my words, Jack Kinch, Liberty.
Okay.
That kid has bulldozed defenses all year long.
He looked real good against Pinnacle.
He looks good every single week, Jordan. That's what's scary.
Yeah.
I'm going to watch out for Jack Kinch. Over 1,000 rush yards this year alone, and he can catch a ball.
All right, good stuff.
There we go.
Appreciate Devin coming on, giving his insight. Coming up next, we have Justin Spears of the Arizona Daily Star and ESPN Tucson. He's going to break down some of the playoff action that's happening with these Tucson schools. So keep it right here on the Friday Night 360 AZ Preview Show.